Clarity by Dragons in Chapter 17 Break. So I have a question. Yang had their attention as no one was that anxious to speak otherwise. The entire expedition thus far, a silent procession, reminding them too much of a funeral. What is it? Humoring her partner, Blake wasn't too eager to gab, but was even more reluctant to let this tense silence continue. The Vital Festival takes place just before finals and after Mission Marathon, right? Yeah? And those aren't until 3 months from now. Sounds about right. Then why the hell is the town getting up with the festival in the next week? That was a good question. An even better contrast as Team Ruby strolled apprehensively through the streets of Vale, which were decked as if it were a holiday. Streamers and signs and gay colors, people walking around with such a pep in their step that even the coffee-deprived office workers looked like a hungover bachelor and revelers on the third day of the party. The whole town bustled with such cheer, one would never guess they were plagued with a string of dust robberies, or that a group of killers was silently taking out unwanted flotsmen like discarded wrappings. That these things were indeed happening simultaneously was, to put it mildly, disconcerting. Don't be so stiff, Yang. The blonde turned, practically whipped around in surprise to see Whis, of all people, telling her this with a gush like ice melting in spring. It's the Vital Festival. No, Yang firmly denied. Happy Whis, on top of everything else, was the straw that broke this reality. Her dark-haired partner even had to put on a pair of sunglasses, as the Harris's cheer was as blinding as a sun of snow. I mean, just look, the clash of cultures, the art, the tournament, and all the organization and planning that goes into the tournament. That's better. Yang sighed, a sense of normalcy warming her. Boring reasons of the excitement make much more sense with you. Oh, Yang, your jokes are so funny. We sighed dreamily with a smile that was straight out of their nightmares. I take that back. Resisting the urge to retch, Yang felt the chill like a sickness tickle her spine. It says a lot when Ruby is acting better than you. And in the view of their perfect world, would you get off of me? But your sword is so cool. The trio turned to see Ruby hounding a random bystander about his weapon, or maybe squirreling was more appropriate, as she was all but climbing on the aforementioned tall man's back to analyze his sword from tip to pommel. Oh, the mechanism in this seemed complicated. What does this transform into? Actually, it looks like it can come apart. Maybe it's dual wields. Ah, is that hard like dust in the hilt? That's rare. The man was helpless as the hyper team captain scampered around him like a chipmunk or a horsefly that he couldn't swat away without it popping up and biting him somewhere else. You were saying, cracking a rare smile of amusement in response, Blake's partner lost her universal upbeat mood and fell with a groan and her head in her hands. Get off of him and stop embarrassing us. Though it was impossible to say who was more embarrassed, her sister or her partner, as Weiss had to step in and pull their leader. And why was that again? Off the little innocent individual. No, sword, must touch, Ruby uttered. Great, she's devolving. Sighing, the huntress was sure she was getting some gray amidst her ivory-colored hair. It was your idea for this outing, and you've done so far is manhandle people. Oh, right. With a nod, Ruby suddenly went limp and allowed herself to be peeled off the poor huntsman like a wet bandage before reversing and skipping off back to her team with partner in tow. So where to first? Thrown off by her personality, which didn't seem any more chaotic than usual. Little did they know Ruby was acting with ulterior motives. Ever since hearing about that bookshop owner murder on the news, Blake had been in a mood, rather a mood gloomier than more clementing than the dark-haired social delinquent had normally. To an outsider, it was admittedly difficult to tell the difference, and like with Ruby, Blake was trying to capitalize on this fact and pretend that nothing was wrong. Unfortunately for the brunette, her captain had spent 2 weeks in the woods with a boy with as much emotions as the cardboard box their own resident cat faunus chose to hide inside. Once Ruby had learned a little about how to read him, everybody else was easy in comparison, like starting a game on insane mode and winning on the first playthrough. It was Ruby's hope that with this outing she could coax her team out of their funk. Currently, though, Weiss was the excited one, so she would take advantage of this even more rare event to placate the Harris before moving on to Blake. Thankfully, they had left early. It wasn't even noon yet, and so there was perhaps time yet. Maybe letting Blake choose the restaurant they ate at would be a good way to start. Although her teammates had their own plans, so caught up in her own musing, the girl with unfocused eyes missed her team's ongoing conversation. Why the hell are we going to the docks? Recognizing the change in terrain, Yang crossed her arms in contempt of the Tudorian architecture. Her personality guarded against anyone she might run into seeking retribution from some of her previous exploits. That does seem like a strange decision. Blake mused, having her own reasons to steer clear of the commercial district. Seems like, the brawler scowled. You mean is? A fist clenched under her folded biceps. She was suddenly as suspicious of her white-haired teammate as she was of every corner which might be hiding a threat. What's the deal, Weiss? Nothing much. Weiss sniffed, not appreciating the other's anxieties. I heard that a new shipment of dust is coming in and wanted to see if maybe we could get some, since it's from my company, she explained. My way of saying thank you for being a great team. While Ruby looked like she was trusting enough of Whis' smile, the other pair of partners looked at each other before turning back at Whis with narrowed eyes. Bullshit! It was the most direct thing Blake had said in a while. Excuse me? Whis huffed. We don't believe for a second you want to go to the docks to check out dust shipments. Yang supplied, though the thought occurred to her seconds after, which allowed her to relax slightly. However, I know for a fact that the students from Vecchio are showing up today. What's your point? On the other hand, we scowled as she felt like she was being put on trial. This is reconnaissance, Blake explained as a professional witness. You want to scope out the competition? Prove it, Weiss hissed. Hey, Weiss, I got those binoculars if you still... Ruby's helpful enthusiasm was cut off by a swift punch to the throat, courtesy of her partner. Comfort sacrificed for an vision of the tension. Why? Unfortunately, the captain was unable to appreciate her contribution, as with a wheeze she collapsed to the ground. Clarity. Kitsune blinked. No, Naruto blinked. No, wait. It was Kitsune after all, right? The line was growing incredibly blurred, like the whiskered marks on his face, which were covered in a skin tone makeup he'd borrowed from Namiku. Shit! Okay, recap. He was on a mission, or was it a dream? It felt like one, or at least felt the way it was always described to him. The questionable nightmare where one walks into school without clothes, even without actively seeking this attire, even without ever attending a day of school. Naruto slash Kitsune had been exposed to it so many times it entered his subconscious like a contact high. Someone bumped into him and he nearly lashed out in the frantic self-defense reaction of a user on a bad trip, but he was not a druggie. A skilled warrior trained since birth, an assassin, albeit by his own ambition, and apparently the official records mentally unstable. Luckily, the deep-rooted instincts overrode the superficial ones, roots unfortunately running deep and wrapping around his nerves like a straitjacket. He managed to turn the flinch into a pat-down of his partner that could be excused as checking for his non-existent wallet, or the burner scroll the guards had taken away at the door. He still had pockets, clothes, though not his usual ones, feeling even more naked without his armor, and he was armed, though quite a bit less than he'd like to be. A few small daggers scattered about his person that would have been hard to find short of a full body search, to say nothing of the quick, I don't got anything dangerous on ya, right, kid? The white fang grunts had given him at the door, along with the condescending smirk that could have been seen underneath their derivative grim half-mask. Of course, his very existence was dangerous to himself and others. Perhaps Kitsune should be grateful the security was so lax, but that didn't mean he could be. He was a professional, though perhaps not the only one. There was no telling who among the rabble was capable of seeing through his disguise, or stumble through it like the awkward huntress. He was, however, all alone. Even if the Gaul had once again managed to smuggle himself into the overly enthusiastic and underage crowd of new recruits, the old dog couldn't necessarily be counted as an ally. After all, he was the one who sent Kitsune on this mission. What? The tatami mats and the insuate walls that did their job of making the one-word questions sound like a whisper, the ceramic in front of his face making it almost like as if nothing had been asked at all. In fact, Kitsune hadn't even realized that the dissident remark slipped out, thinking it's a state trapped in his mind, died in the space between his lips and his mask. But the Gaul paused too and lowered the ubiquitous manila folder from, from in front of his youthful face. His slow blink like wax dripping. He stared at Naruto, but the thick lenses made it seem as if he was looking at the space between them, at a dead mouse his subordinate had dragged in and laid on the ground. Solo mission infiltration. White Fang recruitment rallying. Dogal reiterated and the highlights of his assignment with the same fish-eyed scrutiny that managed to be both simultaneously unfocused and sufficient. Picking apart Naruto's prone form like a corner declared death by natural causes without so much as donning gloves. It was the nature of their interim chief of intelligence, giving Naruto the feeling that he'd always been across from him in this room, and yet just passing through. Any of that ring a bell? Again, it felt as if he had failed some sort of test. Ever since the mission to assassinate Tuscan, he'd been on edge, aware that they could be judged by this foreigner who was self-described as the assassin's auditor with the callous, bureaucratic looks to match. Mission understood. Kitsune acknowledged, yet it was understood that there was something more, which managed to stay silent this time. Dougal sighed audibly. I share your hesitation. Kitsune himself wanted to deny it, but Dougal insisted on removing the issue piece by piece, like bullet fragments, perhaps comparing scars to show that he too was human. I don't approve of what my predecessor did. He threw you into the deep end, but now at least you have experience on infiltration missions, and this one should be. No, I won't say that it will be easier. And Naruto was grateful for this small favor, for although he didn't believe in jinxes and such, Sakura did, and while neither she nor the others would be in this mission with him, this was its own bad luck. Your mission is only reconnaissance. You indicate during the briefing that you do not believe your identity is compromised. There was only one person who could possibly recognize him, however, that one person compromised him in ways Naruto was only just discovering. However, if at any point during the operation you judge it to be too dangerous in any manner, I want you to pull out. There will be no questions of your decision. Understood. I'm questioning, although I thought we were done with the White Fang, and though he said he wouldn't, Dougal seemed to judge him. Hardly. Like the huntsman, for as long as we both exist in the same space, we can never completely wash our hands of each other. He threw the folder onto the ground in the space between them, and rested his soft, clean-shaven chin in his palm, leaning heavily to one side. For once, the Gaul looked uncomfortable, as his poor posture suggested. And the White Fang don't just exist in Vale. As you know by now, my affiliation is permanently with Atlas. They took this knowledge in stride, both that Kitsune knew and that Dougal knew he knew. The situation there requires that I keep close ties to the official government. In turn, they allow us to operate within their borders, almost like a paramilitary group. While I cannot personally claim such a close relation with the man himself, General Einwood acknowledges our usefulness. It is in our capability for solely that he requires us. According to him, the military has misplaced one of their prototype Paladin super heavy combat robots. The Gaul was uneasily frank with his concept, face remaining fixed while he wrung the words out like a disrag. It went missing while en route to one of their proving grounds in the south for tempering climate testing. Currently, it is unclear who dropped the ball, and Ironwood cannot personally investigate too closely without letting the word know they lost it in the first place. So, as you can guess, he has subcontracted the task to us. It made a certain amount of sense, but Kitsune couldn't necessarily say he would have guessed it. While the assassins were known for keeping a low profile, this didn't exactly make them trustworthy for top military secrets. It also eluded Naruto why the Gaul continually trusted him with such responsibility, while the man himself took every opportunity to point out his naivety. My history with Atlas's government and their fondness radicals well predates Ironwood's administration. Though he gave this up, a shallow smirk like an unmarked grave let Naruto know that there was even more there which would likely never be exhumed. Even before I came here, there were already rumors about the old guard, whispers about the White Fang's new leadership in Vale. Some call this upstart scheme daring, others say foolhardy. Many on both sides rightfully consider Taurus to be a danger, and if the talk is true, they are right. You believe that Vale's White Fang are responsible for the theft? Kitsune was finally able to put two and two together after reconstructing the argument from the jumbled pieces he'd been handed, and you want me to infiltrate their rally because they would undoubtedly show off their accomplishment to demonstrate their power and garner new recruits. Exactly! The light tone in his voice was an egg timer saying finally, only to be dropped like a hot dish from the oven, though I wish there was someone else I could send with you as a backup. It is not required. And if it was, like a game of Jeopardy, the question reminded him of something Ruby said. Do you mean to say that everything will go perfectly, or that you can handle it if something goes wrong? There is a reason we operate as teams and gather as an organization. Teammates, comrades, friends, two sides of the same coin were both the huntsman and this human substitute talking about the same thing. He didn't know enough about the man. Honestly, Naruto didn't know enough about him to grasp the difference. We all lack something, Dogal sighed, gathering his breath that was expended in that brief burst of zeal. What I lack right now are subordinates in your age group that can pass on as fondness. No one that could believably accompany you into the lion's den. I'd send Charna, but even she cannot hide in that large of a crowd. Kitsune couldn't hide his surprise. The mats being pulled out from underneath him before he caught himself. Kuma is a faunus? He could be lying, except that ever since they met, the man was ironically more forthcoming than even their Kage. Even for Chief of Intel, Dogal knew an unhealthy amount about their secrets for a stranger, more than Kitsune apparently knew about those closest to him, perhaps more than Naruto knew about himself. You didn't know? Knowing affliction as if he expected it, although not surprising. She does not display any overall traits. Look underneath the underneath. Wasn't that what Kakashi had taught them? Though Ruby had pointed out that is the blindness of certain personal aspects, Naruto thought he would have picked up on a detail like that. Perhaps she was a chameleon faunus, hence how she was so good at going unnoticed, or maybe her traits were simply hidden, scales winding their ways like stockings up her legs, or a tail short enough that she could tuck it away. She got rid of them. Got rid of a solution as callous as a bureaucrat with a whiteout. It was necessary for her immigration from Atlas. Anyways, that's not important. The Gaul seemed to be doing the same thing with a wave of his hand, dismissing the secret he exhaled like smoke. While there was a moment where Kitsune wanted to protest, he ultimately let the man move them forward rather than linger on the disturbing feeling of concern he held for his comrade. What this means is that you are the only one who can safely infiltrate the Right Fang rally. The questions around safely were as visible as the claw marks on the side of buildings that would guide him to the rally, painless in contrast to the cold-hearted actions of his ally who had taken all the steps she believed were necessary for a better life. And what was Kitsune willing to give up? He had already relinquished his humanity, and was this perhaps too much? Would he give his tail to have it back, and I, his cursed arm? Dougal smirked, roused him like Yama from the Bardo. Break a leg, bastard. Whispers like an instant itch urged Kitsune to break every bone in his body the next time they met, and now he sounded like Sakura. Great. As much as he's touted his independence, Kitsune would be grateful to have the girl's female intuition in his present predicament. With the Team 7's slew of recent misadventures, he learned to put stock in her gut feeling. Speaking of, Kitsune kept in mind his secondary personality objective, which, coincidentally, overlapped with his current assignment. Part of the reason he hadn't brought up Namikuji suspicious to Dogal was because he suspected the man already knew. Maybe the mission was to assuage their concerns or distract them. Perhaps it was a test to see if they could find out the truth, or else keep it quiet. Clarity. Attention returned to their outing soon enough, just a few blocks down the road. Ruby watched the cops stretch another line of security tape around the crime scene, cutting off that part of the sidewalk and forcing them into the street. Though effectively preventing civilians from randomly wandering over evidence, the flimsy cordons did nothing to keep the violence contained. "These robbers are getting out of hand," one of the officers sighed in commiseration as he secured the loose end of the barrier. "Getting," snorting as he kicked some odd bits of broken glass that had flown into the street away from the gutter. The second cop turned back to his partner and shoved his hand into his slacks where they could see his fist balls. "Try already, R. This is the third one this week alone. I thought homicide had it bad." Gazing over the chaotic scene, though, they could see how much work was cut out for them. "Between the bodies and list of damage stacking up, this place is going to hell." "Don't think that way." With a sense of seriousness, the second cop scolded his partner. "Next thing you know, we'll be having Grim swarming the place." The mention of Grim sent shivers as indiscriminate as the monster's appetite. They might have been feuding with the ones responsible for half the problem, but the girls of Team Ruby knew that if the creatures of the night got involved, it would be everyone's problem. Although, if this campaign against us continued, the outcome might very well be the same. "This is terrible." Feeling terrible for not being able to do anything else, Yang once again folded her arms and grunted in impotence. "We should get out of their way." Weiss remained prudent, ushering her team away before their carefree outing was fouled any further. She wasn't quick enough. Did they do that? Did they do that again?" "Yeah, all the money's here," the second detective acknowledged from inside the windowless shop, "but not a speck of dust like they used the vacuum cleaner. Why wouldn't they have at least cleaned up all this glass while they were at it?" That made Ruby stop. Do you think the White Fang's behind this?" Uh, Joining his partner on the inside, the first cop took a long step over a shelf that had been overturned in the doorway. "Reports have been coming in too much to be public paranoia. The pharmacists have been pretty active recently." "Could be," the second nodded with a look around the interior, "but usually they leave a calling card as something to tout their grievances. Far as I know, the old guy who runs the shop wouldn't harm a fly." "Maybe," the first agreed as the two walked off to discuss more sensitive details out the girl's earshot. "Of course the White Fang would be behind this." With a huff, Weiss turned to her back on the scene, which was becoming unfortunately mundane. "Nothing but a group of degenerates." "What's your problem?" Blake asked with narrow eyes, slowly becoming more outspoken, but in the wrong direction for her captain's taste. She wanted her team's mood to improve, not degenerate. "Nothing much." Weiss gave a sardonic shrug, unable to believe that her teammate needed to ask. Likewise, the privileged Harris was unaware of the scorn Blake sent her. "Perhaps I am simply tired of hearing about a group of good-for-nothing criminals." "That's not fair," Blake retorted automatically. "The majority of the group is just misguided, led astray by the change in leadership and tactics. They still have the same ideals." "Yes, and those ideals involve wiping humanity out of existence." Looking around the skyline, Weiss was keen on focusing on anything else but the current topic. "Stop being overly dramatic." Blake rolled her eyes. "They literally say it at their rallies." Weiss was unable to keep herself from turning back at her teammate. It's a simply propaganda, no longer brooding. Blake was more animated than they had ever seen her in a while. Bluster, they need to take an extreme stance because otherwise humans won't take them seriously, so they have something to give up in consciousness. Their company took the same tactic when they tried to get more workers in the mines, making it to seem like the paltry safety measures they allowed were a huge benefit. The difference is that we're not actively trying to kill people. Blake scoffed, an ugly sound that made it seem like her lungs were as black as her hair. Oh, that's hard to tell with the yearly mortality rates in your company's mines. Sure, the rate of tunnel collapse has gone down, but the same can't be said of the cases of mesothelioma and asthma. The two girls seethed enraged, glaring at each other with neither backing down. What's worse, a few cases of misguided violence or a systematic slow genocide. Nothing you've said yet has made me doubt the White Fang were the ones behind this. This wasn't them. The two turned to the voice of reason, seeing Ruby still staring unblinkingly at the crime scene. How can you be so sure? Weiss questioned, almost hesitant to refute her captain. Because it's exactly what Torchwick tried to do when I ran into him, she responded without missing a beat, without missing a detail of that night, as she recalled it as critically as the police conducting their investigation. He went in, demanding all the dust and nothing else. She had almost forgotten about him after everything she had gone through. After dealing with assassins, the man seemed insignificant. That was, until she had seen just what effect his attacks were having. It was almost a sacrilege to think that it rivaled the damage caused by the killers, but here was the evidence, and unlike the others, she had no empathy for the career criminal. The black mask and the blonde halo in her mind was eclipsed by a brawler and orange sweep of hair covering a cruel smirk. Yeah, he definitely did this. That still doesn't change the fact that the White Fang are a bunch of scum. Unable to share her personal connection to the crook, Weiss was still focused on her own boogeyman. Those faunists only know how to lie, cheat, and steal. That's not necessarily true. While she'd been unable to sympathize more with the errors over the time spent together, Yang was hesitant to agree with the spewing accusation. Yeah, we can do other things too. Completely unhesitant, the four girls whipped around to see who had talked, and Ruby had to do a double take when she saw his appearance. It was him. We all know how to break dance, throw great parties, and are inventors of the game Beowulfs and Huntsmen. Ruby blinked, a triple take as she retracted her previous assessment. They might have shared visual similarities, but the personalities were just too far apart. The boy confronting them had tan skin and short, spiky, light blonde hair, a shade sunnier and closer to Jonas's pale straw than Kitsune's gilded field of wheat. Furthermore, the newcomer was closer in age with the rest of her team than he was with her, and to top it off, or rather to round off the difference, behind the boy a matching blonde tail was repeatedly tossing an apple in the air and catching it without even looking. A monkey tail. His hand had been his had been orange and that of a fox, an irony Ruby hadn't thought of before. That doesn't do much to help your case, monkey boy. Yang chuckled as she couldn't help her gaze from roving all over his well-defined chest and abs that were on display underneath an unbuttoned white shirt. Sure about that? Taking his fellow blonde's blatant gleam in stride, the boy smiled and placed a hand on his hip, brushing back his shirt and flaunting his perfect figure. You seem to be enjoying what I have to offer. I most certainly am, Yang said in a sultry voice as her hand reached out to touch his rock-hard chest like it was the sacred stella, only for the boy to stop her. Whoa there! He winked at the huntress's hand, still caught in his own. You got to buy me dinner first. Oh, you're fun. Yang grinned and grabbed his hand back with force enough to squeeze a bit more out of the boy's grin. Under the sun, which is my name, by the way, Sun Wukong. Haven Academy student at your service, ladies. Releasing the impromptu grip, strength content, he introduced himself and took a mock bow. Name's Yang. Yang greeted with equally historic flair. The gothic Lolita over there is my sister. Have you been hanging out with Coco? Ruby asked, having been called that by the beret girl on multiple occasions. Hello. She greeted timidly after the less than flattering intro. Nice to meet you, Lil Red. His son waved a nod, overlooking how the young girl scowled at the nickname, though unaware of the reason. The pricky looking one is Weiss, ignoring how her sister's own mood was hardly amicable. Yang continued the exposition. Schnee. Weiss was quick to add her title with a wrinkle of her nose. Cool. Though Sun was seemingly unaffected by either the name nor her cold personality, equally quick on the uptake. Nice dress. Excuse me, but I'll have you know that it's a combat skirt, Weiss hissed, taking his hospitality in contempt. Which isn't practical, Blake muttered to herself, but in a tension that turned to her as next in line, Weiss heard. Is so. You tell him, sister. Coming back from her temporarily disdain for the nickname Roman had given her, Ruby leapt to her partner's support with an arm around her shoulder. This was the important topic after all. Combat skirts ruled, though not as much as bazookas. And the moody one here is Blake. Unbited, Yang finished with a thumb jabbed back at her partner, who was hiding slightly behind her, though it didn't keep her eyes from meeting, a spark leaping over the blonde huntress to connect the two. Nice bow, some complimented simply. Thanks. But you know something? Sidestepping his fellow blonde, the son closed the distance between himself and the close-up huntress. I think you'd look better without it. Blake looked on the edge of panic, her eyes widening and her pupils dilating until they seemed to just be black hairs floating in her amber eyes, and just as quickly went back to her deadpan with the blink removing any sign it had been there. Wait, you said you were a student at Haven Academy? Latching onto a previous detail, we wedged her question, which was more like a demand in between the silent exchange. Yes, why? Scratching his head, Sun tried to make sense of all the different reactions to him. Haven doesn't arrive until after the break. Her eyes narrowed in suspicion. And you know this how? Already trusting their new acquaintance, Yang was also sure she knew the reason. So why are you here now? Weiss ignored the blonde bias, insistent on an answer. I decided to leave early, scout out the competition and all. Sun sounded sincere, ironically innocent compared to Weiss, who had the same idea. See, at least he's honest about it. So wait, the headmaster just let you leave before the semester ended? It was getting harder to tune out her teammate, but Weiss was adamant about her line of questioning. Oh, finals were last week. Sun brushed off like he managed to do all the other strangeness and hostility. There's just 2 weeks off classes after, and then the break for us. That didn't answer my question. Well, there he is! Being answered in a roundabout way, the five turned to see a group of police and men dressed in sailor uniforms round the corner and point at the newest colleague. Gotta run, ladies! Giving a two-finger salute, the son leapt off before the four could form a coherent response. Get back here, you no good stowaway! The pursuers called, passing the girls. Says the crew that didn't even catch me until I was off the ship! The faunus laughed as he sprinted away, taking to the rooftops, which were clearer than the streets, just now becoming crowded with the morning commute. Oh, he was definitely fun, Yang sighed, a breath of fresh air and comic relief that was untainted by the baggage of the past week. Rather than linger on this, though, the huntress let her eyes trail behind her prey. Great ass, too. Yang! Not everyone thought it was so great. Ruby groaned as she had to once again put up with her sister's antics. What? We were all thinking it, filthy faunus. The exception being Weiss, who couldn't see past the tail Sun was using to swing from street lamp away from his pursuers. I hope we never see him again. But that guy was competition for the tournament, right? Ruby pointed out with some hesitation, and that is why it is our duty to make sure he gets to Beacon safely, Weiss explained as she about faced and run in the same direction as Sun. Plans derailed, the red-clad speedster followed as the caboose of the crazy train, now winding its way through Vale's port district, thinking at the very least that they'd left the argument behind at the docks. At least that's what she had hoped.